You're listening to the Jofara podcast hosted by Chris Lee. The Jofara podcast helping people of color to level up.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another fantastic edition of Chris Lee's Jofara podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. We are joined by thought leader, yoga educator, journalist Leslie Rangel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here to chat a little bit more.
Indeed. And I'm excited to learn more about what you do and all the exciting things that you have to offer. So the first question that I have for you has to do with, I think, some very clever inclusiveness on your part. On your website, it says that mental wellness and equity for journalists of color and journalists of conscience. Who all is included in that?
Yeah, I think anyone who really wants to focus on mental health and remind ourselves that we're humans, right? We're not robots. We are humans with brains, with a conscience, and anyone who believes that to their core, to their soul, or maybe wants to believe that. I there was a point where I didn't know that I was a human. I was like, I'm just going along life doing these things. And then I realized, wait a minute, I'm a human and I can say no to things and I can put my mental health first. So yeah, I think that includes anybody who really is just going about their life and saying, life could be better for me. Life is so beautiful and so precious, and we only get one for now. Maybe some people believe multiple lives. Who knows? But and in that, people from all backgrounds. I think sometimes there's also the common misconception that yoga is a religion, but
Yeah.
it's really a science, and it's just a way of life and a way of being. So long answer,
Yeah. No,
but
that's
yes,
great.
anyone. Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's great. So the first thing that we have to do really is to acknowledge how difficult it may be for people of color to cover the news, local events, national events, and try to put some strong feelings aside to do a job. But those emotions don't just magically go away. They're still there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting being a person of color who's also a journalist and with the notion of being neutral. I think that's very hard, and whichever school of thought you subscribe to in that journalism world, I think the bottom line is, regardless, there are a lot of emotions, and just by our very profession, we can't go out and be journalists and have one. We're not advocates in the sense that we are going out there with something in mind, right? It's about being able to cover a topic um and be able to keep your composure, and I think that oftentimes those emotions do get stored away, and you ignore them, and as they're layering on top of one another, they just keep building and building and building, and sometimes if there's no outlet for that, they explode.
Hmm.
I always like to say, if you don't make time for your wellness, you'll be forced to make time for it. So you can either take it into your own hands or your body will.
Yeah, that is true. Now, I don't study yoga, but I study like energy medicine and energy healing and all those modalities and things like that. What must it be like? Because my most of my background, I did work behind the scenes doing TV news, but most of my background is radio.
Yeah.
And as radio, you're not there. You're reporting on something later, or if it's some
Mhm.
breaking news, you're reporting on it from the station. What must that be like to be somewhere where there's upheaval or controversy, or somewhere where a crime has taken place and you're there in that energy space? What does that feel like?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think so. In my capacity and my role right now, in the Leslie that is today, I am my primary job is to be back in a studio, right? Reporting what's happening. And so I don't get that opportunity anymore to be out in the field, actually being in that energy and covering that. I think the way that I am now as a person, the way I've grown, I would be curious to see what that would be like for me compared to when I was there. And so I'll take you back, we'll time travel back a few years. And this was Leslie that was barely dipping her toes in mindfulness and mental wellness and the yoga space. And at the time, I was very great at compartmentalizing. And so I was driven simply by adrenaline and getting the deadlines, meeting the deadlines. And so I don't think that in those moments, I had the time to really fully embrace this is what's going on and to actually be able to sit in that. I think that didn't come till later. And so it it's very it's very interesting, I guess, to think about who I am now and the tools and things that I have and really the way in which I see the world, how I might be able to experience those things differently. So, but at the time, it was a lot of compartmentalizing, a lot of adrenaline, a lot of going home and really just being so exhausted that it was just like sleep all weekend after something really heavy, and quite frankly, at the time, drink. That
Yeah.
was my outlet, was just to drink and veg out, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
I've been there before. I wrote a whole book about it. I've been there
yeah,
before myself.
yeah.
And then I've been out of the business as far as the TV part of it for a long time.
Hmm.
So much has changed in the world and so much has changed with
Hmm.
news and everything. I can remember when I started, this is kind of aging myself. A news crew was a person that would just drive the van, a cameraman,
Hmm.
a lighting guy, and the reporter, like 5 people. And I'm
Ah.
noticing now they'll send the truck out somewhere and the reporter will bounce from location to location and go and do live shots and stuff. That's
Mhm.
got to be like super stressful as well, adding to on top of everything you're already contending with.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I often hear of our crews having to do that, and they don't have the luxury of having like a five-person crew. And in fact, myself, I shoot my own stories. I'm the photographer, I'm the editor, I'm the reporter, I'm the producer, and I write, edit, and produce all of my stories. I have a series that focuses specifically on communities of color, and that came out of really a need to share different stories, right? I think so oftentimes stories about communities of color do focus on crime, and and even within that, there are a lot of disparities in the way that it might be covered. And there's a lot of data on this. This is not my opinion. This is just data and great great people in the industry have studied this, like SPJ, Society of Professional Journalists, National Association of Hispanic Journalists, National Association of Black Journalists. The Poynter Institute has great data on this, as well as the Pew Center for Research. And there's one more that is escaping me. This is a group of people that do data up at Syracuse University. I'm not remembering their name, um, but basically showing that the way that news gets covered in communities of color just is historically skewed. And so um, I think it's so important to really be able to share many stories and many different perspectives. And so I'll bring that around to the fact that, again, I am my own writer, editor, and producer, and sure, I in the way that works, I'll write my stories, and then my editorial, we have an editorial board, so to speak, and they'll take a look at it, and then we'll air those stories. But the way that journalism has really changed, even just from when I started professionally about 10 years ago, it's very different. There's a lot of streamlining kind of everybody does one thing in what are titled multimedia journalists, or this term is it's kind of going away, but they would also call them one man bands, multi-platform journalists. So that's just a fancy way of saying one person does everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And now on a professional level, I can tell, having seen some of your classes and stuff, it definitely shows the skill set has definitely transferred over to what you're doing with the news yogi. So so I tip my cap to you. What was the starting point for you for this journey? You kind of touched on it a little bit, how you would compartmentalize things, but what was the starting point on the journey for you as the news yogi?
Yeah, so in 2016, I was doing just that. I was covering a piece of news, and in that coverage, I heard some things about people who looked like me and who had similar backgrounds to me that were really being described in that moment very just horribly, and people who were violently wishing for their, death, like death wishes for people who looked like me and shared my background. And again, usually you go, you cover the story, you come back, and that's it. But that day, something weird happened within me, and I got really emotional, and I started crying, almost like uncontrollingly. I was like, something is off here, and I need to go live in just a few like minutes, and I don't know what to do. And I knew at that point that something was wrong. And so that was my kind of like, okay, layering incidents upon incidents, not only just from news, but from my own upbringing as a child, as a first generation daughter of immigrants, and really ignoring a really traumatic upbringing that I had. All of that, plus going into a pretty traumatic career, it just all was like, Leslie, we can't anymore. And so it went poof. And it
Mm.
was at that point that I kind of knew, okay, this isn't normal. Like I should, this is not a normal response. I think I knew something had to change. And at that moment, I really had two paths. It was either just give up and give up into the emotions and continue finding some sort of happiness, at the bottom of, of a margarita glass, and shopping. That's something that often doesn't get talked about, I think, especially for women, is this abuse of needing things and items to feel validated. And so that was definitely me, to the tune of having a lot of credit card debt, and just always looking for those material possessions to find my worth. So it was either that path or it was something else, and I knew that I needed something else. And at the time, I it's not that I was against therapy, it wasn't something that I really grew up with it being normalized, and I never really heard anybody else talk about therapy. And at the time, I was on a news reporter salary. I think that's another misconception, that people in the media get paid lots and lots and lots and lots of
Yes.
money. That is
Yes.
only like maybe 20 people who work in New York City, and that's that's about
Yes.
it. So I just did not have the funds, and I had already been doing yoga in my life, and I knew that it made me feel different than, say, my boot camp classes that I was going to, but I couldn't really pinpoint what it was. And so I dove into a yoga teacher training, and it was in that teacher training that I really learned what yoga truly was, and really began to understand why it was making me feel different than all of my boot camp classes that I was always going to. And it was just the pure fact that I could take a step back and witness what was happening, and actually pay attention and listen to all of these emotions that had bubbled up. And then, that one political whatever rally that was happening. That one little thing that was just the cherry on top, or maybe better said, the straw that broke the camel's back. But that's how that came about, is really just finding myself at the crossroads of two paths, and I'm glad I picked the yoga path.
Me too. Me too. And listening to you talk, you're so right. It's like when it comes to people of color, the immigration story is like, but when it's not people of color, they're like, oh, my parents immigrated were from Dutch. They were Dutch and they immigrated here. And, it's like a whole different narrative. You know?
Yeah, and I do want to be clear. Like I'm not taking a political stance
Of
on
course.
either.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that um, I think we can all agree that just the immigration system is broken, right? And I just really want to personify that. At the time, there were just a lot of emotions for me, and I don't even remember exactly what it was, but it was just the fact that someone wished for someone's death, and that was the tipping point for me, was really feeling that, and not knowing what to do with those emotions.
Yeah, indeed. So at this point, you have taught over 500 journalists, probably have 1,000 hours of yoga instruction. What has been the most surprising thing for you that you've gotten from yourself, and the most surprising thing from some of the students that you've taught?
The most surprising thing. I'm not quite sure that I understand the question. Can you rephrase it, like a something that I've noticed that's been surprising,
Yeah,
or
like, oh, okay, how about
okay.
this? How about this? What, for you and for what you've seen in other people, what has been the most fulfilling?
Okay. The most fulfilling. I think whenever I teach journalists, and they have this idea of what yoga is, like you have to roll out your mat and you have to be really flexible in order to do all these crazy stretches and poses, and you have to touch your toes. And then I sit and I teach, and they go through one of my workshops and they realize, wow, sure, that's one portion of yoga, but I always say I could go the rest of my life without ever doing a yoga pose in the traditional sense of what Western culture and society has made yoga to be. I could not roll at that yoga mat for the rest of my life and still be a yogi and still practice yoga every day. So I think that's been one of the most fulfilling things, is when journalists can really understand that yoga is simply the fact of being able to take a step back and being mindful about what we're doing, how we're going about in the world, and really just listening to, how are you doing today? And taking a walk in nature is yoga. Meeting with a friend and laughing and truly being there in person with them, or virtually, but actually having each other's attention, is yoga. What we're doing here is yoga. The act of just being a good human is yoga. And so I think those are often the parts of yoga that don't get talked about. It's typically like the pretty poses and the bendy bodies. So I think that's one of the most fulfilling parts, is really capturing that real essence of what yoga really is.
I love it. Quick sidebar. What's your opinion on all the variations of yoga? I've seen goat yoga, kitten yoga, puppy yoga, trap yoga, yoga Pilates.
Yeah, um, that is there's a lot, and I'll say this. I think that it's important to acknowledge where the lineage of yoga comes from, and who truly this practice derives from, and the fact that they were able to gift And when I say they, I talk about like um, the Indian heritage. There's also new thought and new study and research of Kemetic yoga, which came from Egyptians and Africa. And there's even some thought that um, it's not Mayans. It's another group of indigenous people from Latin America that also had similar practices to yoga. And so I think, acknowledging that this is the baseline, this is where all these practices started, and then moving forward in such a way that honors them. I think the latest thing right now is people are questioning, well, when we hear the word namaste and what it means, and is it being used the right way? And so, I think everybody can draw their own conclusions, their own opinions on it. But I just like in news, I stick to the facts, and for me, the fact is that these practices were gifted to me through a long lineage of teachers, and I'm going to do my best to honor them in that way. And so, for me, will I be teaching a goat yoga? Maybe not. But if goat yoga or beer yoga or whatever yoga is going to be the portal to bring someone into learning about their own bodies, about their own minds, well, then who's to say that that's wrong? Maybe it's just that one little thing that helps people find a new path. So.
That's true. That's a great way of looking at it. Because kind of crotchety old guy, I'm like, there's no goats in yoga. But you're right. If that's the thing that helps introduce them and open their mind up to a whole new world of wellness, then hey, it's all good.
Yeah.
Now, one of my favorite testimonials is of yours is where one guy said, I was a broken mess, but after Leslie's teachings, I emerged a whole new person, confident in my identity, my career path, and who I am. How does that
Mm.
make you feel? That's pretty big.
Yeah, I can think about this person now, and it was beautiful. So in my teachings, I also want to be crystal clear. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a licensed therapist. I am simply someone who mirrors others in the beauty that is already within them, right? And so really holding up that mirror and asking those questions in the way a journalist does, and really just helping others find the answers that they already have within, right? And so um when I can see people truly see themselves in the beauty that they are, it's just so I don't even have words for it. It's more so just a reminder that this is my purpose, and that for some reason I was, I'm here on this earth as a journalist, but also helping other journalists find their worth. Um I think too many times we as journalists, we tell everybody else's stories, right? We're telling other people's stories, but we forget to turn the lens on ourselves and say, well, what's your story, Leslie? What's your story, Chris? And when we forget that we, again, are humans and that we are people of conscience and that we are a whole living, breathing being, when we forget that about us, how can we truly go out there and tell human stories? Because, we can't we can't embody what we're not embodying. So, yeah.
Yes, indeed. So now kind of getting into a little bit of the nuts and bolts. Most people don't even know that they're getting burned out until it's too late, until they reach like total, like you did, total meltdown, burnout.
Yeah.
What are the early signs of burnout and what can we do about it?
Yeah, I think really just beginning to notice, everybody's going to have a bad day, every once in a while. But if every single day is a bad day, that might be something to pay attention to. If for me it was, every single weekend the only thing I could look forward to was where are we going drinking tonight? It was like literally like working for the weekend to party. And I will say I am not sober. I do responsibly enjoy a drink or two here and then, but even now, like I was talking with my husband, I was like, I don't remember the last time that I indulged in a drink, and I'm okay with that because it was just, before it was my crutch. It was Leslie's feeling sad. Let's go get margaritas. And so, just taking notice of in what ways are you dealing with those emotions, and if it's an answer that might be like, should we really be doing that?
Yes.
Maybe
Yeah.
paying attention to that. Also too, getting snippy. I that was something that I'm guilty of. I always felt like, I had a temper. I hate to fuel the stereotype, but like, the tempered Latina, like, and so that's something else that I really had to take a step back from and be like, why are you so angry all the time, Leslie? And now with the tools that I've learned, I realized that my nervous system was just so dysregulated that I lived in the fight flight zone of the hierarchy of the way the nervous system works. And so I never had time to complete that cycle and actually allow my body to rest. I think also too, gut issues. That's a huge one that often doesn't get talked about. Was always had a stomach ache. And you know, I he was my boyfriend at the time, but my now husband. He'd be like, "Well, where do you want to go and eat? Wherever. Anywhere we go is going to make my stomach hurt." And at the time, it was just like, whatever. I'll eat whatever. It's going to make my stomach hurt, but really paying attention to the fact that our bodies and our digestive systems are so connected to the entire thing. Like our nervous system is the one who sends all this information. And so when you are stuck in that fight or flight, or any of the other portions of it, there's also freeze and fawn. But when you are stuck in any of these portions, what's happening is the hormones are pumping through your body. And so, in order for that to continue processing to keep us alive, it's pulling hormones from other places like the digestive system. And so that might be another thing that you're just like, oh, my stomach hurts, but you ignore it. Or on the flip side, if you're not eating and if you're never getting hungry, that might be another thing to pay attention to. So there are a lot of subtle little things that your body's like, hey, pay attention to me.
Yes.
So yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like your body is always trying to give you messages, and every
Yes.
headache, every stomach ache, when you're constipated, anything like that is a message from your body.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
That is interesting. And it's also interesting. I also do not practice sobriety. I enjoy a drink responsibly because for me, the way that I felt about it was the drinking was not the issue. The issue, it was a coping mechanism. And once I
Mhm.
started addressing the emotional issues, I actually lost the desire to go out and party and drink all the time.
Yes, yes, and that's exactly what has happened to me. Every once in a while, really and truly, if I do have a drink, it's to enjoy a glass of wine. That's something that I do enjoy. I love a dark red wine, or what I've really enjoyed lately is kombucha, like a boozy kombucha,
Hmm.
and that I it's fun, and maybe I'll, sit and watch it, or sit and drink while I'm watching a movie for date night, but it's so funny. I don't have the craving to use it as a coping mechanism any longer, like similar to you, Chris. And we don't go party, and we're not like, what are we doing tonight?
Right. Yeah.
It's like really even it's in relationships too. I think it shows up differently, and there are some relationships that I've moved on from because I realized that that we were just friends because we both enjoyed partying a lot,
Yes.
and now that I don't do that, I've realized that maybe our relationships are just sometimes you outgrow them and you
Indeed.
thank them for what they were then and you move on.
Yes, indeed. So I did one of your challenges, and we ended up you ended at the end of the challenge, we had like a yoga meditation.
Yeah.
Oh, that was like the best because I am a type of person, I don't realize that I'm stressed out sometimes. And after
Mhm.
I like went and took a nap after that because I was like so relaxed.
Yay.
And here's the thing that I liked about it.
Mhm.
When it came to the yoga, it wasn't anything like sometimes with certain yoga instructors, you feel like they're trying to
Mhm.
show off. They're like, hold this leg and make this leg touch your ear. And you're like, wait, wait, wait. All of the moves were like smooth, fluid, kind of easy. Is
Mhm.
that kind of for all of the stuff with the news yoga? I know you got some on-demand classes and stuff. That's kind of is that the
Yeah.
feel of everything?
There's a little bit of everything. I mentioned earlier that I do boot camp classes. So I think there's a space for every type of yoga, and that brings me, and I teach a little bit of this in my 8-week course. It's an 8-week intensive, just really diving into your yoga practice, and really it's a journey of self-discovery, but I teach about this in the portion that's called doshas. And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with doshas. The it's the science, it's like a sister science to yoga. And so what doshas are three basically makeups of the earth element. And so there's kapha, pitta, and vata. So kapha is the earth element where you're really grounded, you're really one with the earth, and there can be imbalances in that, right? And so if you find yourself that you're very slow and lethargic and just very just slow to move, you might be very kapha heavy, and again, there can be imbalances in that. Then there's pitta. Pitta is very fiery, and so if you're someone who maybe like enjoys a lot of spicy foods, and you're really competitive, and you're like, let's go, 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 yeah. And then there's vata, and vata is very airy, so it's the air element. Pitta is the fire element. So vata is like, oh, whatever, like let's just go with the flow, and a lot of times vatas tend to have a lot of digestive issues because there's a lot of air, and so oftentimes there's a whole ayurvedic portion to it, which focuses on like what kind of foods are you pairing for which dosha you are. And so within that, again, long explanation to say, in my on-demand studio, you'll find a little bit of everything because I'm very vata pitta. So you can be a combination, it doesn't mean you're only one. And then sometimes during different times of your life, you might have imbalances. So at the time, I was very pitta, vata, and so I was always go, 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 and really enjoyed boot camps. And in fact, my first teacher training was an Ashtanga training, which is a set number of poses, and we go, 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 and we do the fancy poses and all the crazy yoga tricks, in terms of the physical asana practice. And what I learned was that I needed that slower portion of yoga. I needed to slow it down and be in my thoughts. So in the yoga and that I teach in my on-demand studio, you'll find a little bit of everything. And for those days where you are feeling a little bit like just I don't feel like doing anything, there's a quick practice in there that says yoga for when you don't feel like doing anything, and it's going to be a very fiery practice. And then there's the time where you don't feel like doing yoga because you're probably like, I just want to go, and so there is the slower practice. I think also too, because there is this intimidation, I think, that happens when we use the word yoga, I also want to make my classes accessible. And so in that 10-day yoga challenge, which folks can still sign up for that, they could just do it on their own. So it won't be together, but it's 10-minute practices. And I think that's another thing is like, humans, we're just busy, right? Like, just in the world of 2022, we're just busy. And so the thought of like rolling out a yoga mat, waking up, doing a whole practice, that might sound cumbersome. Maybe you'll get there eventually, but for now, just doing 10 minutes. We spend easily 10 minutes scrolling on our phones. So set the phone aside and do a quick 10-minute yoga practice. And it doesn't have to be anything grandiose, so no headstands. And so you just enjoy it. And so my goal in that is, again, just to make it accessible for anyone and everyone.
That is great. That is great.
Yeah.
Now we've come to a part. I've been waiting so long to have this conversation with you. We both had mentioned it and kind of talked about it a little bit.
Yeah.
You had mentioned EFT tapping on a couple of your
Mm,
Instagram stories. That is something very near and dear to my heart because after my
mm,
accident or sustained a brain injury, EFT and tapping totally changed my life. Kind of give
mm.
us a little bit of background on what it is and how do you incorporate that into what you do?
Yeah, so I will be honest, I am still immersing myself in the training. So right now I'm in the middle of a mindset coaching certification with the Yes Supply. It's this wonderful teacher, Reese. She's from Toronto, and we are just diving into it. I've done a few EFT practices. I will say I'm not super knowledgeable just yet in being able to eloquently explain all of it behind it. But I'll give you a little bit of what it's based on. And really, it's based on training our subconscious mind and reminding ourselves that we can reframe our thoughts. And so when I explain subconscious and subconscious thinking, I like to think of it as like, if you can think of a movie and its soundtrack. I'll personify it by, we'll say something like The Lion King, right? When we think about the Lion King soundtrack, sure, there are a few songs in there, but for the most part, it's like very joyful. And I can think of, everyone getting together and kind of dancing. It's kind of like just this joyful type of soundtrack. And but you can also remember like the parts where Scar takes over, right? And so it's like this more darker music and that feeling. So in that same way, can you think of your own soundtrack in your life? And what is that soundtrack you've been telling yourself? And for me, before it was a lot of Leslie's not enough, and Leslie's not going to be able to do this, and Leslie, always has to be this other thing, and Leslie can't be herself because if she's herself, then she's not going to be able to succeed in whatever it was at the moment. And so that was that negative soundtrack that was always playing in my head. And so here's where tapping and working with the subconscious really comes in is you begin to rewire that and to change that soundtrack and to say Leslie is enough and Leslie can accomplish these things and Leslie can show up as her full entire self, and the people who love her are meant to love her and supposed to be there, and the people who don't quite jive with her, that's okay. We can release them. And so what tapping does is it helps remind you and helps really sink into the body these new thoughts, right? And so just the practice of reminding yourself and getting your brain and body to remember these things. One thing that really stuck out with me is that our brains and our bodies only work, let me rephrase this, only about 10% of our brains are working from a conscious place. The whole rest, like 80%, 80 to 90% is in the subconscious. So like right now, we're all, if you're listening to this, you're not having to tell your ears, hey, listen to this. And then, all of the little things are going to be like, oh, okay, we need to listen. Like it's just happening. We're not having to tell our lungs, like, okay, you need to expand and contract, expanding, and our blood isn't, we don't have to tell our blood, okay, you got to move this way and then you got to move that way. Like this is just all happening, right? And so within that's the subconscious, and those thoughts that we tell ourselves that can often be negative, those are all playing in the background. And so when we can begin to reframe that through practices like visualization, like meditation, like hypnosis, like tapping, we can shift that. And for some folks, this might sound woo-woo, right? This is like, whoa, what are y'all talking about? But I'd like to bring your attention. I'm gonna forget his name right now. He was one of the players of the LA Rams. I'm a big football fan. My team is the Cowboys, but I appreciate just football in its entirety. But it was an interview that was done with one of the players from the Los Angeles Rams after they won their Super Bowl in January. And, the reporter is interviewing him, like, how does this feel? And he just stands there for a moment and looks around, and everyone is cheering on them. And, they've just won this football game, the football championship, and there's confetti and there's fireworks and people are crying and there's Gatorade everywhere. And you can tell he just revels in that moment for just a second before answering it. And he goes, I dreamed this. I visualized this. And someone who might not understand visualization in the subconscious, they might be like, oh, that's sweet. He dreamed of it. Now he's here. But no, these are practices that people at their highest levels, leaders, world athletes, Olympians, are doing these practices. And he talks about how he would visualize standing in the Super Bowl as he's won, and he would visualize and feel the confetti, and he would visualize and hear the crowds. And I think it's a beautiful way to really show that these practices aren't, woo woo. It's actually a science, and the data is out there. And I think if we just learn to pay attention a little bit more, and to just, sift through all the distractions that are ever changing, ever daily, we can, we can find these beautiful moments. So yeah.
Yes, that is a fantastic explanation.
Yeah.
That's like
Yeah.
better than 90% of the explanations I've ever heard. Either they're too fancy or not in depth. That's great. That is great.
Yeah.
As far as how the connection between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And wow, that you got me excited.
Yes. Let's go win a Super Bowl, right?
Yes. Well, not my team is not, for sure. The Lions are not going to Super Bowl. But that's okay.
Maybe you need to introduce some tapping to them.
Exactly, right? Yes. I think as football fans, when you live in a city where your franchise just has been struggling for years and years, you actually end up picking other teams that become your team. Like, the Lions, I'm rooting for you, but I'm a big Ravens guy. I like the Ravens.
Yeah.
I like the Rams. So you know how that goes.
Yeah,
Oh no, you don't.
it.
You're a Cowboys fan. They usually win a lot. So.
Yes, but we're still visualizing our Super Bowl. It's been quite a few years. I love the Cowboys though. Every year is our year. That is one thing. We're good at visualizing that.
Yes, and at least they're kind of in the thick of it every year. The Lions is like, yeah. Now you on your social media, you've got some stuff cooking up as far as some classes that you're working on. Can you kind of give us a little bit of a sneak peek on what you got cooking?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not sure when everybody will listen to this. This is what the really cool thing is about podcasts. I think we all listen through various times and spaces, and who knows. So at the time of this recording, I have a workshop coming up. It is on September 7th. So, if you're interested in registering for that, it is free. There's a link in my bio on Instagram. I'm at the News Yogi. You can also get on my email list, which is also in the link in my bio. But that workshop is called News, Noggin, and Your Nervous System. And we are talking about how news affects our noggin, our brain, and how that then translates to our nervous system. And so that's coming up September 7th. And I haven't really publicized this. So this part is kind of new here for the podcast, Chris. I am starting another cohort of my 8-week course. It's a deep dive in it's an immersion course into somatics and the nervous system and yoga, and that is launching September 26th. I like doing, I like starting projects around the new moon. So September 26th, that's a new moon. It's a beautiful time to just start new things. And so that's September 26th. I will defer everyone to my email list. If you're interested in finding out more about that, check out my email list. But there's a lot coming. I took a little bit of a step back in terms of the news yogi and what I was doing at the beginning of 2022. I suffered a loss, and so I was giving some space to sit with that grief. But I've found a different viewpoint of that grief that I'm really excited about, and even just saying that sounds funny, right? You're excited about grief, but that's a whole nother, we can do a whole nother hour on what that means. But yeah, if anyone's interested in just keeping up, just you can find me at the News Yogi on all social media, TikTok too.
Nice. I notice that's something I kind of admire about you is when you like have reached a point where you're starting to get burned out a little bit, you'll just take a break and step back,
Hmm.
from social media. And then you'll come back a week or two later. Hey, I had to take a break. I
Yep.
really respect that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's crucial, right? Social media is always going to be there. The algorithm is always going to be changing. Like it's this spinning wheel of like keep up with it. And sometimes, I can feel like a cat with a laser pointer, like you're always trying to catch it, but you're never really going to get there.
Yes.
So, don't be afraid if you're someone who is an entrepreneur or a wellness entrepreneur. I'm of the school of thought of, if you need to take time to step back, take time to step back. I did it, and in fact, I took time to step back, came back, kind of stumbled, and then went away, and then came back, kind of stumbled. And so it was kind of a couple of stumbles to come back in, but it worked. I'm back now with 2 feet on the ground as opposed to stumbling in. And everybody who my work resonates with, they're still there, and the people that aren't, well, they're not. And from a business point of view, those are probably the people you don't want with you anyway. It's because they're not really contributing to your to your success in the future. So
Indeed. Yeah, indeed. And I feel like you're really good at including people in things. So I feel like as like more than just being a follower of the news yogi, I feel like I'm a part of a community. And
yeah,
that's
yeah.
really, really important.
Thank you. Yeah, that was something that was important to me too, to be able to build community. And it's one of the pillars of yoga, right? To be able to have sangha, which is community. I always tell this story of, if you can think of like avocado, it's just the nature of life, really. You can think of avocados. Avocados always grow at least in pairs. And I think that if we can take our cues from the world around us and earth and the cycle of life, I think if we can get back to that, it really helps us move forward in the future. And it's the idea of learn from history, right? And so community is so important. It's so important. So I always like to make sure that everyone who is a part of the news yogi, feels like a part of the news yogi. And I've gotten some questions like, well, I'm not a journalist anymore. Can I still, I'm like, yes, once a journalist, always a journalist. So yeah.
That's great, because that was one of my questions. It was like, do I belong here? Because I know, like, I would hop on the lives and there'd be people who are reporters from this town and that town, some of your
Mhm,
colleagues from there in Austin. And I'm like,
mhm.
I got dumped from my radio job like a year ago. Do I still belong here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important, and that is one of the things that I emphasize in teaching, and specifically in my 8-week course. There are there are many, many journalists right now who are leaving the industry for a variety of reasons. And and a lot of them are burnt out, and a lot of them have been living in this idea that they are maybe not enough. They always have to be on. And I see it in my opinion. I'm not a scientist, but just in some of the things that I've learned and really applied to my own life, I see a lot of journalists living in a dysregulated state. And it's evident because I hear from a lot of journalists who say, I've left journalism and I've left news, but I still feel like this anxiety and this anxiousness. And I still feel like I need, there was one in particular. She said, I couldn't even go to the restroom because I'm so conditioned to, I have to stay here to write the stories and finish the show and do the whole thing. And then once all that's done, then I can go to the restroom. So this person has moved on, but she's like, I still feel that now at my job, but I had to remind myself that it's okay to go to the restroom. And
Yeah.
so what happens is, the nervous system hasn't had the time to reacclimate. And so this course, this journey, and the workshop talks about that. And it talks about the fact that sometimes, you can be working in what you thought was your dream job, but sometimes our dreams change. And so, what are you going to put first? And I have had people who've gone through my course who, up level in their career, and they go on to graduate school to really hone in on their skills, and they're really great journalists. But in that too, there are other success stories. I have one journalist who realized, I love news, but news doesn't love me back, and I'm ready to put myself first. And so this journalist is moving on. They're leaving the industry, and I don't see that as a fail. I see that as how beautiful that you were able to realize that at one point this was your path, but now you're changing, and that's okay. And here are the tools to help you keep going. So
Yes. Yes, indeed. What message, as we reach the end of the episode, what message would you like to give to anyone that's listening, that's in a space where they may be burnt out, anxious, depressed? And I know that you're very fluent in Spanish. So if you could please give us that message in English and in Spanish as well, because that's what the Jafara
yeah.
podcast is all about, is for just helping everyone, people of color, no matter the background or the language that they speak.
Yeah. I would say if you find yourself, burnt out, or really just being curious on if that's happening to you, is put yourself first. You are enough. I think, you know, oftentimes it's easy to think, I'm going to disappoint so and so, I'm going to let so and so down. But for a moment, be selfish, care about yourself, because if you don't put on your own oxygen mask first, how are you going to be able to show up for others? And we only get one life, right? We only get one life, and it's so short. It's so short, and we never know when our time now is going to end. You and I can finish, and whoever's listening here, we can finish it, and then that might have been the last thing we do. And so thinking about, what would you do in this moment if you knew the answer was going to be hell yes? And whatever that is, keep going, and you are enough. And if you've already visualized it, that means it's possible, and you can do it. You just now need to figure out the little action plan to get there, and that starts with you. So I'll say that in Spanish. You put me on the spot. I would say I don't even know how to say burnout in Spanish. I don't frequently share the, talk speak these terms, but I would say, si hay alguien que se siente un poco burnt out. I'm sorry, I don't know the Spanish termination for that. Um, Recuérdense que ustedes son humanos primero, y si tienen miedo de que alguien va a estar decepcionado en las decisiones que usted tomen, pues que no les importe, y que se pongan a ustedes primero, porque si ustedes no se acuerdan que son humanos y que ustedes valen la pena, entonces puede haber que nunca realizan sus sueños, y siempre recuerden que sus sueños valen la pena, que ustedes valen la pena, y qué bonito ser un humano, y qué bonito tener esta vida, porque solamente tenemos una, y nunca sabemos cuándo esta vida se va a terminar. So.
Awesome. Awesome. And I have to tell you, and I've waited for this episode to tell you this face to face or side by side, kind of
Yeah.
close face to face. So we met in a breakout room at an online class. And you
Yes,
talk
we
about like
did.
energy and stuff like that. We both looked at each other like, hey. And it
Yeah.
really has been, and this is how you know you found somebody that's really a part of your tribe. Being friends with you has been like connecting with a relative that you've known your whole life, that you have all this other family together, like a family connection. So I really appreciate that. And over the course of that friendship, I think it's been a couple years almost, part of the reason that I am here doing this podcast is because of some encouragement that you've given me. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, Chris. That means so much to me. I was thinking about that time too, and it's so beautiful that, we've never met in the flesh, but I feel like I know you, and it's been so lovely to really notice your journey, and likewise, you inspire me. A podcast is on my list of things that I want to do. And I'm like, well, Chris is doing it. I can do it too. So yes, let's keep inspiring each other. And who knows? Maybe we did know each other before.
Exactly.
in
Right.
a different life.
Yes. And my philosophy is, if I got it, we got it. So anything that is a part of my knowledge base or experience, I will gladly share with you when it comes to podcasting or anything else.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Definitely, I'll have to hit you up on that. So
yeah, for sure. For sure. Now tell everyone where they can find you and where they can sign up for your 8-week course.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to just the News Yogi, www.thenewsyogi.com. You can get on my email list there, or you can send me an email. I'm Leslie, Leslie at thenewsyogi.com. Follow me on social media, send me a DM. Yeah, I think that's about it. The workshop is September 7th, and then the course starts September 26th. So if you're really excited about it, shoot me an email. Like I said, here on the Joe Farah podcast, y'all are the first to know about the course and when we're starting. So that's not out in the interwebs just yet. So if you're interested and want to have a chat about it, let's do it.
Awesome. 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 This has been one of my favorite episodes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris.
For more great content, follow Chris on Instagram at ThinkChrisLee or visit www.thinkchrislee.com.